overcoming fear and anxiety, gaining confidence, public speaking, better preparation and practice, the power of storytelling. All this and more. Welcome to the High Achievers Club.
Hello and welcome to our live here today, where as always we are going to be talking about public speaking, and today we've got a special session where the focus is going to be on storytelling. I'm going to cover what are stories, how can we create stories, and how you, most importantly, can use stories when you are speaking in public, giving presentations, sharing team updates, whatever that is for you. That's what we are going to be covering, and we have, as always, an amazing panel of experts here to help and support you. So what we're going to do some quick intros so you know who these wonderful people are. While we're doing that, take a moment, connect with them on all the platforms you're seeing us on as well, and then you can get even more value and see how they can help and support you going forward as well. So we're going to go Harriet, Sharon, and then Movell to do some quick intros. I say do be checking out their profiles while they're doing so. Harriet, over to you.
Ladies first, hey? Such a pleasure as always to be here with you. We have had some trouble behind the scenes getting live today, but it was another beautiful example when you want to do something in life. Patience and persistence. So I'd like to honor Andy and Movell and Sharon in this moment for persisting and getting us live here today. Patience and persistence, I think they are so key to our speaker journey, and of course in the ability to really share our story in an effective, powerful and impactful way, which is of course what we are going to be discussing today. For those of you that don't know me, I am Harriet Bratt. I am a speaker. I'm many things actually. But in the context of this live, I am a speaker trainer and firewalk instructor. And I support driven entrepreneurs to overcome fear, overcome those jitters, those nerves. You know, when you go to speak up and you start questioning yourself in your mind, should I say this? Is this right? What will people think? I support you to shift through that fear, those nerves and anxiety, and to speak up with confidence in a comfortable, powerful and effective way. Over, did you say Movell or Sharon next? I got too excited.
Eva.
Over to Movell.
Oh, hang on. Am I muted? I'm not muted. Hey, everybody. So I am Movell, Movell Dash. I am a D&I or DE&I, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Consultant, and also a coach working with women and businesses, helping them to just realize their goals in terms of inclusion. But I also public speak on that topic of inclusion and equity and strengths and imposter syndrome, a whole gambit of things. I enjoy speaking. It's something that is key to my business because it's about thought leadership and getting that information out there to as wide as audience as possible so that we can make this world a fair and equitable place. So that is me. And I hand over to the beautiful Sharon.
And thank you so much, beautiful Harriet and Movell and the handsome Andy. Yes, I'm always so excited to roll with the crew. Yeah, Sharon, the faith coach, Sharon Shannon, and always excited about public speaking is what we're doing right now. And we're focusing on storytelling. Why? Because stories are important. There's glory in the story. And I help Christian women to level up in their speaking. Yes, and not be afraid like I used to be, to not speak and not tell their story. No, we have to rise up. So I help them with their voice, their story, their impact, and growing their online businesses as well. Yes, Andy, back over to you.
Thank you, Sharon, Movell and Harriet. So as you see, we have some amazing experience and expertise here to help and support you as we go through today's live. And my name is Andrew Sullivan. I'm a 5 times best-selling author on books on public speaking, pitching and presenting. And I've taken a journey from never being able to speak up, never share my stories, my experience or knowledge, to now being able to help people to share theirs. And I think that's so important as we find our voice so that we can, say, share experience, share our stories and let people know what it is, first of all, our journey, what we've been through, so we can help and assist them, because it raises our profile that helps us wherever it is that we need to get our voice heard. And so today's room is going to be all about that particular subject as well, talking about storytelling, so sharing our experiences, how we can do it. But maybe I will lead this to Harriet, who's going to take us through and lead us through as she rises us up today. Harriet, over to you.
We rise together.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andy. And of course, amazing Sharon Movell. As I said earlier, this is always a pleasure. Every time we connect and meet, I get excited, not only to share and help others that are watching this, but also to learn, right? I've grown so much with this incredible group. And of course, other mods that aren't available to be with us today. However, today's session in particular excites me so much. Storytelling, bringing stories into your everyday communication, understanding, Sharon said it earlier, there is glory in your story. But what I thought it was important to start off with is understanding why. Why is storytelling so important? Why is there glory in your story? Why does your story matter? And then as we go through this session today, we're going to discuss where different environments that you can share your story. There might be some people watching this thinking, well, I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't have my own business. I'm not a speaker. I'm not presenting. I don't need to share my story. But actually, stories can support us in parenting, in helping groups of friends, in speaking up in our work environments, even just chatting and sharing with a stranger. Stories can have such a powerful impact. So we're going to be discussing why and where you can share your stories. And of course, wrapping it up with how. How do we share our stories in a way that land? How come there are some people that start sharing their stories and it feels like they're going on and on and on, and you can see the audience and the listeners are just kind of drifting off and thinking about, oh, I forgot to send that email. What am I going to have for dinner tonight? Versus those people that grip you. They start sharing their story and you are hooked. You're intrigued. You want to know more. So how? How do we share our story in a way that really engages and impacts the audience to make a difference? So we got a lot of juicy information coming to you today. And we're going to, as I say, kick off with the why. So feel free, as we say, we're a smaller panel today, so it's really beautiful that we'll be able to get into a little bit more deeper conversation than hosting all of our amazing panel here. So just kicking off with why. Andy, Sharon, or Movell, please feel free to unmute. Why is storytelling so important?
Well, Harriet, I'll take this. The story is the emotional connector. And we say this all the time. And the reason it is the emotional connector is just as you said, if we're telling information, if we're just giving information, when I say just, not minimizing that, if we're giving technical information, which are the facts and the figures, that's very important that we do that. However, though, if we're not giving some type of emotional something, a conduit for people to, from our heart to their heart, from their heart to our heart, then the information can be really abstract. And what do we do when we see an abstract painting? We're like, what is that? Okay, I think that's saying, and we stare at it for sometimes hours. We could, right? So we have to have some type of what I call a binder that really touches people. And if we don't have that story, then there's going to be a disconnect, and we'll kind of sort of only have half of a message. And then, Harriet, you mentioned how we tell the story. That's another important element. But for the most part, the story is the emotional connector. That's why it's important to tell it.
Beautiful. And of course, for anyone watching, as Sharon says, make sure you stay tuned right to the end, because we're going to be sharing exactly how you can share your story in that way. And Sharon, just before we come to Andy and Movell, you picked up on something there, and I knew it would be relevant today, but I was watching a program this week, and it was exactly what you were just saying. There was a lady, stunning woman, very intelligent. She's a neurologist, a brain doctor, and she was sharing about a new treatment that they have discovered and have proven to be working that supports global brain injury. Now, she was in the room with probably about 50 people with the good old PowerPoint presentation. And for about 25 minutes, like Sharon just said, she was going through case study after case study after case study, information, all of the technical side. Now, again, don't get me wrong. In certain environments, that detail, that information can be very important. But especially if you're expressing in a public space, when you truly get that emotional connection, you allow more people to see the value and the benefit of what you are sharing. So she's 25 minutes going through case studies, and you could see the room. They were like sipping on their drink, nudging each other, looking around. They were disengaged. They didn't want to know. But as soon as she shared why, ladies and gentlemen, this treatment is so important to me because 15 years ago, my dad, my father, was in a cycling accident. He was hit on the head and suffered with global brain injury. Had this treatment been available at the time, we might have been able to rescue him. Boom! The whole room is suddenly hooked, engaged, emotionally connected. What if that was my family member? Or I know somebody that's actually been in an accident, they're suffering. Perhaps this would be relevant for them. It connects us and gets us thinking within our own world and our own existence. So that emotional connection is so important, Sharon. Thank you for sharing that. Mavelle, Andy, let's have one more before we shift into where storytelling can be relevant. Another why. Why is storytelling so important?
I think for me, and just listening to what you were talking about in terms of an emotional connection, and I think that that's certainly important. But I think that there's more to it than that, because I think that even in the way you were talking just now, Harriet, about the person giving that information that was very technical. I know technical people who are all about numbers and figures and will tell you they tell a story with those numbers and figures, right? So I think it goes beyond an emotional connection, and it's just a way of making information relatable, regardless of what that information is. It's about making it relatable. And so if we're just talking about numbers and we don't tell a story with those numbers, then those numbers are just numbers and people are not going to engage with it. So, and some people will say there is no emotional connection to numbers, but there has to be a connection. So it's for me, it's not just about an emotional connection. It's about a connection to whatever it is that you're relaying that makes it relatable, that has other people engaged in it. And I think that's the importance of the story, because a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So whatever information you're conveying should have a beginning, a middle, or an end. So you can make any information into a story, and you talk about the beginning of it, what it is, then the middle of it, maybe, why it's important and why it's important to you and how you can use it. And then the end is a summary of all of that, right? So I think all information can be related as a story, and it's important to tell a story so that people are engaged and can have a connection, emotional or otherwise, to it.
Absolutely. And I think there's that expression, isn't there, that humans are meaning-making machines. So no matter what we are looking at or listening to, we are interpreting and creating our own meaning inside of our minds. So when we put that story in there, it can make it more relatable and meaningful to the individual that's listening. Great point, Mavelle. So Andy, what about the where? I think especially in our sessions together, we've spoken before about, why storytelling. Stella? Who's Stella? Is she coming today? Storytelling. Why storytelling is so important and how to do it. But what about the where? For people watching this or wondering, I don't really have an environment to share my story. Like, where would I do this? What would you say is an appropriate or different environments where we can still share our story, making a difference?
So my background is in the corporate world, and that used to be the place where I thought you could never share stories, and that used to be my style because nobody did. And naturally, you do what everybody else does when you're starting off doing public speaking. So I didn't. My presentation, like the one Mavelle was sharing, beginning was all facts, it was figures, it was information, beautiful pie charts and statistics and research. There's no story, there's no emotion or passion behind it. And first of all, that makes the meetings quite boring apart from anything else. But I realised that actually you can share stories in there. I remember stories are just experiences, things that you've been through, a client's been through, a colleague's been through, maybe somebody famous. They don't have to be just yours. We're just sharing those experiences that bring it to life. So we can make the point. It's fine to share the pie charts and all the statistics and the research. But why? What's the human experience behind it? And if we could share those, they're the parts that make people want to listen. That's what we heard. The people really do lean into those kind of things. And they're the things we remember. I mean, I've never left a meeting feeling touched by the beautiful pie chart. I've never left a meeting thinking how amazing that bar chart looked. And it really got me, that bar chart. It never happens, right? I might be annoyed if it's showing my bonus going down or something, but that'll be it. We don't care otherwise, right? So therefore, when we share those, they're the things we remember. That's where it draws the emotion. You know, we get that heart-to-heart connection. We feel it. We can empathize with it. We can understand how they may have felt, maybe what we would have done in that situation, how we would have reacted, how we would have felt. So I would say we can use stories anywhere, certainly in our business, certainly in our corporate careers, when we're talking to our family, our friends, don't we? When we're sharing the things we've been through, maybe our day, what's happened to us, we share them naturally there. So think about how we can share them in other examples when we're in meetings. We don't have to change to going from sharing stories with our colleagues to being very formal when we're in a meeting. There's so many opportunities. And I think ultimately it's opening our mind and realizing that I think how we can share them anywhere. Remember, it's just a story, is just an experience that somebody's been through. It doesn't have to be you, it's anyone. And so I'd say we can open and be sharing absolutely anywhere.
Amazing. And perhaps we're going to tap a little bit into that as well around the what. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be your story, as you say, Andy. You might practice and share your story at a later date, or not at all. You could be sharing other people's experiences, etc., etc. So that's a great point. You also tapped into something there that I just want to lean into for a moment, because I get this question a lot. I know it's come up within our clubhouse. That thought of, I'm presenting in a corporate environment, I'm in a formal room, I should do excuse me, X, Y, and Z to be very professional. It's not about storytelling. It's not about heart to heart. It's about business and getting the point across to improve sales or improve retention or whatever it might be. So Mavel, you speak in some very formal environments. What are your thoughts around using storytelling in those more formal or corporate environments?
I think it's just about what you're going to talk about, right? And so for me, I'm talking about, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's about people primarily. So for me, even in those spaces, it's really easy for me to tell stories, because stories are what is going to make the difference in that environment. Stories about people are what's going to be the incentive to make change. So for me, telling stories in a corporate space is absolutely appropriate. And I think it's always going to be appropriate in a corporate space when you're talking about your core business, and your core business relates to people. You can always find a way to take it back to the people. Either it's about, if you're selling a product, it's about who are these people that you're selling the product to? What do they need it for? Why is it important to them? If you're selling a service, it's going to be the same thing, right? So I think you can always connect it back to what's important, and that's going to be the people, your customer, your clients, whether that's internal clients or external clients. So I think as long as you can connect it back to people and why whatever you're talking about is going to be important to them, then of course it's appropriate to tell a story, because you can make it relevant then, and you can make it relatable.
And still at the heart in these environments, it's people, right? They're still human sitting in the room. Great questions there, and anyone watching, do take note. There's some beautiful things that you can ask yourself when you're thinking about sharing your story to be able to deliver it in that meaningful way. I think it's Les Brown that says 3 questions that the audience or the listener are thinking when they're hearing you share. Who are you? What do you have? And why should I care? So exactly what Mavel was just saying, thinking about the audience listening and how you can deliver a story with your information to make it more meaningful for that listener, so they understand why that is important to hear. So starting to shift more into the how, but also a little bit of what. So when it comes to storytelling, what stories should we be sharing? Is there a specific story that you should tell, or is this an open book of sharing any, as Andy said, experience that either you or someone else has had? So Sharon, what are your thoughts on what you should share with storytelling?
I think we can share any and every story we want, but this is the caveat. It depends on the audience and what we share regarding the story and how much of it we share. If we're
Yeah.
speaking to, I'm a teacher by trade, so if we're speaking to high school students, let's say male and female high school students, so we know the age of that audience for the most part, and then we're speaking to a 70-year-old, maybe women, totally different. It can be the same story, but how we tell it and the details regarding it to bring transformation is crucial. But I think it could be any story.
Completely agree. And again, you're going to hear some of these amazing pods. We're not going to have time for everybody today, but you're going to hear some of these amazing mods giving some examples of storytelling. Sharon, let me take a moment of praise. I completely agree. We can share any story, but the key is making sure that story is relevant. Relevant information for the outcome of that presentation, for the topic you're speaking to. Does the story connect to your topic? But also, is it relevant for that audience? The way that you are delivering that and the story that you're sharing, does it affect and draw emotion from that particular audience? So really beautifully shared there, Sharon. Okay, so shifting into our kind of final half of our time together today, let's touch into the hows. How do we share our story? Is it as simple as just getting up and saying your experience? What are some tips that would improve the way in which we share? And Andy, with your many years of experience, and I'd like everyone to note, even at the beginning, did you notice that both Andy and Sharon included a little bit of story in their introduction? They spoke to how they used to be nervous and anxious and feel vulnerable in public speaking. And of course, both are now professional international speakers. So they brought their own story into their introduction to relate to people, to say, it's okay, I used to be scared too. I know what you're feeling, but I also know how I can support you and guide you through that. So going to the amazing Andy and his many, many years of experience. Andy, what are your top tips on storytelling? How do we share our or another story in a way that impacts and engages the audience?
We could just pick up when you just shared that. I mentioned about how I used to have a fear of public speaking and never do so. Right? Some people would not want to share that. They would feel that it's embarrassing to let people know this about me. And if I tell them that I used to be scared of public speaking, maybe you won't think so well of me. How are you going to judge me? What are you going to think? And that, I think, it holds people back often from sharing their own stories, that they feel that they have to have this perfect persona. And if it's not there, if they show any clinks in it, any dents or any journey they've been on, it could affect how people view them. Whereas I think actually the opposite is true. When we share what we've been through, when we share some of our experiences, it makes us more relatable. People realize, oh my gosh, you're just like me. I remember sharing once how in a meeting, and this was one of those comments I hadn't planned, about how when I used to be in a meeting, somebody just asked me a question, my face used to go red. Now, that was just a comment that happened, but people came to me afterwards and said how they have that and they think it's just them. So straight away they realize that other people go through that. And this is what we're trying to do with our experiences, let them know that, you know what, I've been there, I've had that experience. I know it's a journey I've been on. I know I can help you maybe. But also, of course, it can be simple things. We can look through some of the things we do in our day-to-day lives. It could be being in the supermarket and having a conversation with somebody, and maybe they did a favor for you. They helped you out, the assistant in the supermarket. Maybe that's an example of customer service that you could use. Maybe they didn't help you out, and it's another example of poor customer service. So there are stories, there's things going on all around us that we can look at and take one story, and maybe there's different views of it that we can have to fit in with the examples that we're giving in our presentations. Don't think that we have to have done something fantastic like climbed Mount Everest to be able to share a story. It can be small things that we've been through. The ones that you will have more emotion with are the experiences that you've lived through. And if you can share those, be open and vulnerable by sharing those, you're going to touch so many lives, so many people who are maybe going through it right now, and you can help them. And I think that, Harriet, is really where the magic happens, when you're helping people like that.
I don't even know where to begin, Andy. You gave so much gold. It's so true. And I love that you brought up and highlighted. I think there's a lot of people that have almost a fear of judgment, nerves. They fear the vulnerability of expressing when they were in a challenging moment. But exactly what you said, and connecting with what Mavelle was saying about why we share our stories, it makes it relatable. In fact, I would prefer, at the beginning of my speaker journey, I'd much rather learn from someone who knows how I felt, who experienced the shaking knees and the heart going crazy and the sweat dripping off me, rather than someone that shows up polished, perfect every single time. So really, really valuable point there as well. Sharon, what are your thoughts on how we should share our story?
Just as you're doing, Harriet. And then, right? I think that's wonderful. Yeah, it brings the audience in when we are excited and we're excitable and we're using voice inflection and we're telling people what it is that got us through, or what it was, what it continues to be. So, what kind of voice projection are we using? What eye contact are we using? Even on a virtual and in virtual environment, we can still play around with where the eyes go. Yes. So, all of that plays into storytelling at a minimum.
Absolutely. The way in which we're delivering that. And just to make it clear for everyone watching, you don't have to just start magically, not magically, frantically
Just
waving
be
your arm.
yourself. Just be yourself.
Yeah, to make you a good storyteller. Exactly. I know you meant that, Sharon, but I just wanted to
Yes,
point that out.
absolutely.
Actually, I had a student in the past. I love to do some dancing at some of my live events. And I had a student in the past actually say to me, I don't want to dance when I start my presentation. Do I have to? No, of course you don't. But it is about bringing your best self. And it's important to see that there's such a variety. I mean, Andy, Sharon, Mavelle, we all speak on a similar topic. Yes, we have different expertise, but we're all able to speak and share value within public speaking. But we all deliver in very different ways. Well, guess what? With 7.5 billion people in the world, there's so many different personalities. So it's the same for the listener. Every speaker has value, and it's important, especially in sharing your story or a story, to show up as yourself, truly confident and certain in what you are delivering.
And I'll say
Something
this,
else,
Harriet.
of course.
Harriet, when Andy just spoke, Andy's like the opposite of you. Okay, you're like, wow, 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 wow. And Andy's subdued, but you were both interesting. You were both engaging. I was totally brought in. And then Mavelle has her style. I have my style. And you're absolutely right, Harriet. Everyone is not this, we're not the same. So sometimes people think, oh, I'm this and I'm that. No, just bring your secret sauce. Just bring your special sauce to the table and be yourself. People will engage. You will engage with the right audience. So I think that really is important.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add to that. I think you have to, it's not just about being yourself, because some people tend to want to be themselves in a particular audience, right? If I'm happy here, I can be myself. But when I go to a different space, I feel like I've got to almost turn something else on and be something else to somebody else. So it's about being yourself wherever you are. You take yourself wherever you are. So whatever the audience, still be me. Whatever the topic I'm delivering, still going to be me. If I'm talking about DEI, which is my passion, I'm going to be me. But if you ask me to talk about, I don't know, grapes, I'm still going to talk about grapes in the way that is me, right? I'm not going to start going, oh, well, I'm a farmer and I'm going to start talking about it like this. I'm still going to talk about grapes in the way that I love grapes. I peel them when I eat them, which is bizarre, but that's part of who I am. I take the skin off and then I eat them, and that's, I'm going to talk in my way about them, no matter what I'm talking about. We don't adapt based on the audience or based on the subject matter. We can adapt the content, but we don't adapt who we are. Always remain true to who you are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I was wondering where you were going to go with presenting on grapes.
Nowhere.
I like it when the grapes go into the wine form.
Yeah.
But you're right, and it is so true. And I think especially the way you wrap that up, it's you might tailor your content, you might tailor some of the delivery, but always show up authentically as yourself in any environment. So, very quickly before we get some examples of storytelling, there was something that Andy mentioned around people having that fear of, well, I don't have a story. What can I share? And whether, like Andy said, it's climbing Mount Everest or perhaps surviving cancer or shifting through some really difficult situations from a childhood. You don't always have to share stories around circumstances, perhaps for want of a better word, as extreme as that. Everybody can connect and relate to your day-to-day situations. Like Andy said, feeling nervous in a meeting, sharing that part of his story was enough for people to come up and say, I felt like that as well. I felt that too. So I'd like to remind everybody and just tap into how we all have a story and it matters. I remember just recently I was on a mentorship, it's about 6 months ago. I was on a mentorship call with Les Brown, and it was all about storytelling. And I have already been out speaking, out sharing my story, blessed to be traveling the world and delivering that impact. But always, like everybody here, give me some love if you love to continuously learn and grow. I was back learning, and somebody gave their example of their story. And when they were 10 years old, they walked into their kitchen and they saw their own mother murdered by their father in front of their eyes. And as this beautiful African lady shared this story, I got so hooked, so intrigued. But just being open here, as I came off the call, I turned to my husband and I said, who am I to share my story? Did you hear what she's been through? Did you hear what's happened? Oh my gosh, she's amazing. I've got nothing to say. Even with that experience of going out and sharing. So I think it's something that everybody can feel. I don't have something to share. Why does my story matter? So perhaps before we give our examples, we can tap into, does everybody have a story? And why does every story matter? And I'm going to go very quickly to Sharon first, because she always says, there is glory in your story. So I'm going to go to Sharon very quickly first, but Andy Movell, jump in whenever you want to. Sharon, does everybody have a story? And why does everybody's story matter?
Everybody and their mama has a story. Just as Andy said, everybody has experiences and we have to tell what happened. But this is the thing. These are the three things I always say regarding stories. And sure, we want to tell the story. That's number one. Don't let anybody guilt us or shame us, and not even ourselves, into forcing or feeling like we have to tell that story because we went through it. So really, Harriet, I misspoke initially. I said everyone can tell, with it, we can tell any and every story. I'll put quotes around every, okay? But we could tell any story. I'll just leave it at that. Whatever. So the number one is we want to tell it. Number two, we triumphed over it. How do we get the victory? Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to encourage and inspire and uplift other people to be better than which they came before they heard our story, right? How can they be even better the next day and more enthusiastic about life? What are we giving them? What was the experience for? There was a lesson in it. There are teachable, so many teachable moments in it. We just have to know how to convey them. And then number three is that, just as I said, we have to be able to contribute that story, whether it's direct or indirect, to the overall message. And why do we need to do that? Because we're not people we're speaking to are not robots. They're not. And if we're not relating the content to anybody's life, that's what I would always tell teachers when I train them. If you're teaching any particular content and you're teaching it and you're prolific in teaching and you're very in the know and everyone sees your credibility and your expertise, nothing wrong with technical information. It's extremely important. What is the outcome? What is the transformation? If there's a disconnect, people are going to forget what we said. If we can't personalize it to every life because we're not talking to machines, then If we can't do that, then we won't have a message that landed, no matter what the information is. So stories have to be well-rounded. There are many elements that go into telling a story and connecting it to the facts and the figures, if you will, the technical information. And if we don't learn to master that, we're just talking to the air for the most part.
Which could still be fun, especially if you're Rob Holman. I can imagine that he would definitely just present to air and still really enjoy it. I play. Yes, absolutely, Sharon. It's so important to be able to connect our story to the information that we're giving. I love that you said about having that desire, that want to be able to share your story. And then, of course, the tips on the how. So, Andy, Mavell, how do we connect our story to the audience? How do we take a specific story, as Sharon was just saying, but make it general so that everybody listening can relate to the story you're sharing?
But one of the things I'd always do is any experience you've been through is look at it from the view. Well, first of all, part of our research we also know is when we're going to give a presentation, what is the message of that presentation? What is the learning, the key point? And therefore, every story should only be there to help support that point, to explain it, to reinforce it in some way. So the example I gave earlier, if we're doing, I would ask about being in the supermarket. If we were talking about good customer service, that could be an example. It could be something simple by showing something I've been through. This is the experience of that. And that is why. Putting one in for no reason, people will soon switch off. It's like when you hear a friend telling you a story and you think, what are they going on about? Why are they telling me this? And you don't know what it relates to. So that's why it's so important to know why is the story there? We need to be able to justify why we've put the story there. But the one caveat I'd always add whenever we're sharing stories, especially if they're personal ones about us, maybe that is not the time to be having an open therapy session. We want to make sure that we are comfortable sharing that story. There's a great saying you often hear people saying, we share from the scar, not from the wound. And I think that's always important when we're sharing stories, especially when something we've been through, maybe something serious, an emotional issue. Make sure we're comfortable sharing with it. Otherwise, it's going to be uncomfortable for us, and then it becomes uncomfortable for the audience. And that's not something we'd want to be in that situation. So think about why it's there. Are you comfortable sharing it? And does it support the point of your presentation? That's the only time I would look to be included in them, Harriet.
Nice. And I've not heard that before. So off screen, I'm going to write that down. Share from your scar, not from your wound.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful expression, Andy. So Sharon, I know that you've got to go shortly and we'll be wrapping up this whole amazing live here today in not too long. So Sharon, I'm going to come to you to share your story in a moment. But just before we do, Mavell, what is, say, one or two practical tips? So we've done that preparation. We know our why. It's connected to the audience. We know that it's relevant. We know that it can make a difference and support our overall topic. What are some practical hows when you're actually in that moment, either on stage or behind the camera, sharing your story? What are some practical hows on how you deliver that story?
So just be clear, be concise. Be concerned about your pace. You don't want to rush through a story, particularly if it's something that is quite emotional. You're sharing a traumatic experience. You don't want to rush through that. If you speak really quickly through that, then people are not going to be picking up what you're talking about and you're not going to get the emotion. So you want to slow down and be concerned with your pace. And that's whether you're telling a story that's emotional or a story that's happy, because we tend to focus a lot when we talk about sharing a story. We talk about sharing a story that is traumatic and how we survive that. Stories can be happy. Right, we can talk about great things too. So watch your pace and make sure that you're making sure that points land, especially points that are really important. So be careful about your pace. Be careful about your pitch and your tone and how you project so that everyone can hear you. So be concerned about how you stand. Make sure that you feel comfortable in the clothing that you're wearing, because you can arrive, and if you're going to be fidgeting and pulling stuff down all the time, that takes away the attention. So just make sure your positioning in terms of how you position yourself in front of your audience makes you feel comfortable, right? So if you want to get down into the audience, go ahead and do that. Some people prefer to do that than stand behind a lectern because it feels very formal. And so depending on what your story is, you might want to actually feel people and want them to feel you, so you get into the audience at that point. So those are just some practical things. It's all about pitch, tone, delivery in totality. But the most important thing is be comfortable. And you can get comfortable by practicing. So practice your speech before you start speaking, and then just make sure that you're comfortable in yourself. When you're standing and delivering, just be comfortable and just deliver from the place of that, as you say, get out of your head and into your heart, deliver from your heart, and think about your audience more than you think about yourself. Everything will be great.
Nice. And when you're feeling comfortable, your audience is more likely to feel that as well, right? If you're kind of anxious and nervous on what you're saying, that sort of energy rubs off in that space. Some great tips there. And I definitely am one that loves to speak on tonality. So I'm going to touch on that briefly before we wrap up our session. But again, Sharon, I know you have to shoot in a moment. Don't worry, Mavelle. Andy, I'm not going to keep you captive too much longer. But are you okay just to go a little bit after the 1:15 mark? Excellent. So Sharon, if you're able to, because I know we're at 1:15, would you have time to just share a little bit of the story, either personal story or a story that's relevant for you in your life as an example for our wonderful audience here today?
I have literally a minute.
Well,
So
we're
I
doing
can tell a
personal
story.
story in 60 seconds or less.
60
then.
seconds.
I know a great room for that. Okay,
the timer starts now. Okay. So you all know I was in the Air Force for a long time. And when I got out of the Air Force, I moved from California to South Carolina to be closer to my family in New York. At least I could drive home. And when I got there, I felt so alone. I was like, oh my gosh, why did I make the decision to get out of a branch of service that I loved, that was so family oriented, because I wanted to try something different. So I found myself really lonely, alone. We didn't know anybody. I was recently divorced. Have you ever felt so down from a decision you made? That's the way I was feeling. So I end up joining a great environment, this great church that really helped me out. And I ended up living in South Carolina for 10 years. And even though it was different than I ever imagined, because I never lived in the South before, and especially a rural environment, but relationships is what it's all about. So I had great relationships with people. I ended up just buying a house. I got another degree and life became better, but I was grinding though. I did the work. And I ended up moving to North Carolina. And I remember I joined another church, and I remember going to one of a life group or a support group or a care group is what we call it, which means that a larger church will have smaller groups of people that meet every month, every 2 weeks, what may have you. And they meet in someone's house. And so we can establish relationships and have more like a home feeling of connection. So I remember being in this one group. I loved that group. But the next year, the church leaders decided that we had to change groups based on location. So I ended up in another group. I'm like, oh, I don't want to meet new people. I really love these people. So I'm sitting there at this new group, and I'm saying to myself, and the meeting's going on, and everyone's sharing their things about them, and we're talking about different verses and everything. And I'm sitting there thinking, I won't be here the next time. I can't relate to these people. I just can't. They're nice. I mean, they were so nice and open, but I was like, I just don't feel connection here. And so everyone was talking, and I'm looking around thinking really how I was going to exit, really, and just say, nice meeting you. And I remember one moment I looked around the room, and I see this plaque, this big plaque. And it was a husband and wife who was conducting the meeting, if you will, or the group. And I look at the plaque, and it said Air Force retiree. And when it said that, all of a sudden, I mean, I could not make this up. I could not plan this. There was such a connection that it changed everything. And I said, I love these people. I just, and it wasn't anything anybody did. It was just a connection, a spark. So sometimes, and many times, when we're just speaking and we're just observing and we're just open minded, we can find ourselves just going to the next level. And that's what happened. So here I am. There I will be.
Thank you so much. Yes, give her some appreciation and acknowledgement. Thank you so much for being open and sharing with us, Sharon. I do know that you've got to shoot, so thank you so much for your time, your value, your expertise. Absolute legend. Do make sure that you are following Sharon Shannon, the amazing faith coach. And of course, we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you, Andy, Mavelle.
Hi, Sean.
Mwah. Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
So beautiful story shared there by Sharon. And we've got probably say 5 to 10 minutes left here in this space today. So we will have another example. But did you notice from what Sharon was saying there and sharing there, some of the tips that were brought in to what she was delivering? Her tonality, her pace, the moment when she said, and there was a moment, pause. And I saw a plaque, pause. You're hooked. You can't help but be intrigued. Well, what was on the plaque? What happened? And again, something that I wanted to add on a good tip, a bonus tip, if you like, on how to share your story is those questions. Engage the audience. So she shared her story, but at the end, she wrapped it up with that beautiful message for everybody. Sometimes you don't think you want to be somewhere, but if you're open-minded, you never know what might happen in that situation. But did you notice halfway through her share, she asked the audience a question, even though she was online, right? There's no one speaking back to her at this moment in time. She said, how many of you have ever made a decision that you didn't agree with or you didn't want to? So instantly by asking that question, and everyone can do this in sharing their stories, it's how, as Rob Holman likes to say, we make the audience the hero of our story rather than ourselves. It's our story, but what can the audience take from it? So when we take those moments to just pause and ask a rhetorical question, have you ever felt this way before? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Suddenly your audience, what happens when we ask a question? Your audience, even if it's in their minds, will start responding and answering that question based on their own experience. So your story suddenly becomes more meaningful for them. So there's another great tip, wonderfully demonstrated by Sharon, on how we can also engage our audience during our own story. So Andy, our amazing Andy, leader and founder of the High Achievers Club, I'm going to be coming into you in a moment to share another story. There was no specific agenda to what we shared today. It was an opportunity to demonstrate different stories, different environments, because no matter who you are, where you're from, what industry you're in, what your social situation is, etc., 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 stories can be used in any environment. So we're going to come to Andy for another example in a moment. But I would just like to add, and Mavelle and Andy, if there's any more tips you want to throw out before we go to Andy's story, please do. I would love to just tap into a little bit deeper of what amazing Mavelle was sharing a moment ago about tonality and pace. If there is one thing that can instantly make a difference in your story, it is the tone and the pace in which you deliver that. And these guys have heard me doing something similar before, but you could be sharing a devastating story, right? You could be saying, you wouldn't even believe it. I walked outside the road today. There was this car that came flying around the corner. It hit into a little girl. She went flying. Blood was everywhere. The ambulances were coming around. As the ambulance came around the corner, it ran over her foot. I mean, you can't even believe that these things would happen. There was like spleen and heart on the road. It was just disgusting. So scary. I hope she's okay. I wonder if she is okay. She probably isn't. But did you feel emotion? Look, these two are laughing. They've got smiles on their faces. Are they just not very nice people because they're laughing at what happened? No, of course not. It was the way in which I said it. And then I could go and speak about my cushion. My lumpy, bumpy, uncomfortable cushion. And even though I'm sharing something completely pointless with you right now, because of the tone I'm using, it can evoke more emotion. So you can feel more emotion about my lumpy bumpy cushion than you can about an incredibly traumatic experience. So I just encourage everybody. And again, it doesn't mean you have to be like this weirdo who goes really, really loud and then really, really quiet, but play around with your tonality. You'll notice that all these speakers today, as they've shared, they've paused. They've used different tones to reflect and really drive home the message that they were speaking to. So my biggest tip for an instant change in sharing your story is think about the tone. What tonality reflects the emotions that you are sharing? And as Mavelle said earlier, not just the pain and the more challenging times, but the happiness, right? The fun times, the exciting times, the celebration. Are you demonstrating that both with your physiology and your tone of voice? So that's an instant tip that can support you with your storytelling. Mavelle, and
I'll just follow on from what you were saying there,
yeah.
Harriet, by just saying, you know, how much emotion you invoke and all of that in terms of pace and tone and tonality leads back to what it is you're trying to convey and what you want your audience. And those of you who've heard me speaking before will know I say this all the time. What do you want your audience to think, feel, and do? And when you know that, that's how you know what kind of pace you want to deliver, what kind of tone you're going to be using, because all of that, knowing what you want your audience to think, feel, and do is going to dictate how you deliver your message, right? If you want your audience to feel your emotion when you're conveying something sad or feel your emotion when you're being happy, then you're going to put all of that kind of energy into it. If you want them to kind of just listen to some facts and you don't want them to feel anything in particular, but you want them to absorb the information so they can go away with those figures and do something with them, then you're going to play in a completely different kind of tone, right? You're going to be far more serious. It's not going to be as emotional because you don't want emotion in something, right? So how you want people to think, feel, and do at the end of your presentation is going to dictate how you present. So just have that in mind. And that's why we say all the time, think about your audience. Don't think about yourself. Think about your audience and what you want them to get from what you're saying.
Yes, Mavelle, so true. And if those watching or listening haven't written that down, do it now. Again, so many people think public speaking and storytelling can be about self. Well, yes, it might be your experience and you standing up and doing it, but no, it's about who you're speaking to. It's always about your listener and your audience. So great question there. What do you want your audience or listener to think, feel, and do? Great question that I think would really support people in practicing and preparing both their stories and their presentations. Andy, anything that you wanted to add before we come to your story?
No, I do have a meeting at 1:30, but apart from that, the one thing I would say, you know, when we are sharing, that's why it's very much being present, isn't it? Being in the moment, not in our head, being present. And then we can, when we are talking, when we are projecting, we're doing it in a naturally conversational way, like we would have any conversation, rather than a prepared, rehearsed performance. And I think that is a big difference when we are speaking. We want to be us. We want to be present in that room. Let's not do that. And I've made that mistake, practicing, rehearsing so much beforehand that it was like an amateur play, a poor amateur play at that, with every gesture, every voice, every tone, everything done like that way. But then there's just no personality in it. And therefore, we're not projecting anything. We're not going to connect with anybody when we talk like that. We want to be very much present in that room and not in our head, Harriet.
Absolutely. And I think it's that trusting in yourself, right? Like you say, people can want to practice it and get it perfect, but it's trusting, well, this is your story. So it's your truth, it's your perspective. It's not a fact or something in the newspaper that you're out there discussing or debating with other people. It's your story. So you are free to share that in any way that is right for you. So trusting yourself and speaking from your heart. Great tip. So finally, before we wrap up our session and finish here today, do comment any questions, thoughts, contributions if you are watching the replay in our chat. And of course, we will come back and either answer them through the comments or on our session together next Thursday. So to wrap up our wonderful session about storytelling today, we have our leader, Andy O'Sullivan, sharing his story today.
Sometimes we're put in positions that we'd really not want to be, and indeed avoid. And for me, that was always speaking, being the center of attention. I used to hate being the center of attention. If I look back at old photographs, when I was in school, when I was in the Scouts, I would always be at the back. I never realized till years later that I was doing that, how I stood back, both figuratively and physically, out of the way, never wanting to be in the limelight. And what projected me to realize that I need to start being in the limelight, I need to start putting myself out there, was when I was forced to by just giving a team update. But knowing that for about 10 minutes, I was going to be the center of attention in front of just around 8 people. They'd all be looking at me. Everyone would see me. That really made me feel uncomfortable. Can you imagine what it was like at 2:15 a.m. on a Sunday, just thinking about a presentation that was coming up in 2 weeks, lying in bed, the pounding heart, the sweaty palms, the dry throat, every symptom you can get caused by anxiety I experienced. And that built up and built up and built up until the very day of my meeting. And if I felt like that 2 weeks beforehand, can you imagine how I felt on the day, an hour beforehand, the minutes beforehand? That is when I literally, if somebody said to me, give me £1,000 and I'll get you out of here, I would have paid it. I felt so petrified. So, of course, I gave the presentation, although I was tempted to run away. And that was the one where I shared my 10 minutes of content that I had rehearsed, I had prepared time and time again. I delivered it word perfect. But that 10 minutes of content, I managed to deliver in 4.5 minutes. So fast, so stressed, so panicked was I. It was literally get up there, get it over and done with, get out of here. And that was all I did. So yeah, I shared the content. But did I help anybody? No. Did I give any value? No. Did anybody even understand what I said? Probably not. Because I was too much in my head, worrying about the judgment, how people were going to perceive me, because I was in the spotlight. And that was when I realized my first lesson, that actually people weren't even worried about me. Nobody was approaching that meeting worrying about me, thinking about me. Nobody even gave a thought about that meeting, really, until they attended. It was only me doing all the worrying. So that's when I started realizing, actually, I need to stop thinking about what I wanted and wanted to achieve in that meeting. And that's where I started realizing the importance of start thinking about other people. And that alone would help me stay more calm, more focused, and ultimately achieve more success for everyone.
Yes, Andy. I think that was what they call a textbook example. Being able to share your story, bring that vulnerability. Andy, you say this in the storytelling room. Can you imagine another great way of getting your audience to start imagining, painting that picture and the details that you used? So I could tap into that and show all the wonderful ways in which Andy was utilizing what we shared earlier on how to deliver in an effective way, etc., etc. But I know we have run out of time today. I want to say thank you to Mavell and Andy. I know we started a little bit later, so we ended a little bit later. So thank you to both of you for your patience, and even more than that, your expertise and knowledge. And of course, the wonderful example of sharing your story at the end there, Andy. I'd also like to say thank you to everybody that is watching or listening. It's been so much fun to be in this space today. And as we say, if you've got any thoughts, questions, do reach out and connect with us. And of course, we will come back and serve as best we can. And if you're not already, do be sure to follow both Mavell, Andy, and our amazing Sharon Shannon that was with us previously on LinkedIn, Clubhouse, whichever platform that you are seeing this from. Andy, I think
Harriet. Follow Harriet too. She's not going to say it herself, but please follow Harriet.
Yes.
Thank you, Mavell. Appreciate that. But otherwise, I think that is it for me. Andy, thank you for the opportunity and the privilege to be able to lead today. And I'll throw it back to you to wrap up.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Harriet, for leading us to today, sharing her amazing wisdom. And we learned so much on storytelling, sharing those experiences and why and how to do it. So that's what we are going to be looking to see more of when you're out there sharing your stories, your experiences, and touching hearts. As Harriet says, you got any questions, even if you're watching this on replay, post them below. We will be seeing them, and we will either address them to you directly in the comments, or we will address them in our next live, which will be exactly 1 week from today. So until we meet again, have a wonderful week ahead, everybody, and be sure to follow Harriet and Movelle and Sharon and everybody else, and we will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.